Welcome to Recall Rescue Roundtable. This is our third in our installment of our live webinars. We're going to be talking about recalls today with an incredible guest. We have Greg Brigham. He's the CEO and essentially he's the owner and developer of Trever Recall Management. I'm your host, Dr. Darin Detwiler. I'm at Northeast University, and I talk about food safety and recall and regulatory compliance in many different categories. But recall is an incredible topic because it's one of those things where the source of a recall can start at many places in product's journey, from manufacturer or from farm all the way to its end user, and it is a part of life, if you will, in terms of industry. And as a consumer, as someone who's going to be the end user of it, we're aware of this. We know about these things, and we have certain expectations in terms of what companies are doing. So today our topic is recall technology and SWOT, like strengths, weakness, opportunities, and threats. We're going to be looking essentially at how digitization and data help to reduce costs associated with recalls. So thank you for joining us, and let's go ahead and start off by welcoming Greg Brigham. Greg, welcome.
Nice to be here.
Greg, for those in the audience who don't know who you are, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, and then we're going to ask a little bit about your Trever company, and let's start with you though.
Yeah, so my background has been since about 1990, 91 or so, is that we started working in the pharmaceutical and medical device space. And so we developed a rather large piece of software that manages complaints, product quality complaints for pharmaceutical and medical device companies. So, with that experience working in a Part 11 compliant world, working with, things that are very controlled, and also working as basically what are the headwaters of recalls, right? Where you start getting complaints to start trending up, those type things. So that's when we started moving into, we started working. Actually, we were interfaced with rather large recall companies that were dealing with one of our biggest clients, but started getting involved with the recall space and those type things, and realized that most of the software, or most of it, was really a service-based organization that a company would need to hire. So that's where we saw that there needed to be something developed that would help a company to be able to do some things on their own and not always outsource this, and be able to communicate, and also change the strategy about how things are done, as opposed to, making money on product movement, those type things. We saw that there's a company could really make money on being able to communicate with a customer a lot easier, and providing a way that they can respond easier without always having to go through a call center, those type things. So that's kind of our background, or my background of what we've done.
So tell us a little bit about Trever. What should we know about Trever?
So with Trever is that it's a way that we allow you to build an action. We don't always want to call it a recall, right? Because we could have field action, field alerts, recalls, those type things. Anytime, and it's in the name, right? It's really a play on retriever. A lot of people look at it, and we have an origami dog as our logo and those type things. So it's a way to get things back. Was the origin, at least, of the name of it. But in basic terms, it's a way that you can create a structure around an action. You can identify who's involved with it, all your clients, all your products that are involved with it, set up automation for alerting them, recording that information that you've made these attempts, closing it out. Those type things is what we did. And the other thing with Trever is the ultimate goal is we try to make it simpler for the company doing the recall, but we also want to make it simple for the person who's receiving it, to simplify it as much as we can. Because when you're doing a recall, you're asking somebody to do you a favor, right? You're asking them to respond. You're asking them to destroy a product. You're asking them to send it back so they can get a replacement. Those type things. It's difficult. And if you just send them a piece of paper in the mail and they have to fill it out, try to fax it or send it back in, you're giving them a job. And we want to make it as simple for your client so that they could actually just respond either online, is through their phone, through their laptop, however, to be able to make it easier for them.
Yeah, it's not like as easy as I would imagine that most people outside the industry would be more familiar with the idea of, you have an overdue book, please return it. This is a little bit more complicated. In fact, Our first webinar, we looked at different classes of recall, class 1, class 2, class 3. But you hinted on something I think is incredibly important for us to start with here. It's not just a recall that we would need to be talking about this. There's other things than just recalls that we want to have product come back. Can you kind of outline a little bit of some of those different reasons?
Sure. So that you could have a field action or a field alert, right? You could have an update to an instruction for use, let's say on a medical device, so that whenever you've got to get that, you need to know that they placed a new sticker on the device. You need to know that they have the new instruction for use that's been sent to them. So, if you don't have an easy way for them to do it, you're obviously printing something out, you're putting it in the mail, you're sending it to them. You don't know if they received it, they've never acknowledged it. If you do anything, you have to do it maybe as a certified letter. And so then the difficulty with certified letter is nowadays the postmen don't actually deliver it, right? They only bring you a card that tells you have to go down to the post office and sign for it. So again, you're making it more difficult for your customer to be able to do that. And with this, with being able to send out an alert, be able to track the fact that we sent it to them, be able to track the fact that they download it, be able to track the fact that they've acknowledged that they've received it. You have all the information you need. You don't have to rely on the post office to be able to do this for you. So that's an example of where you have something that you're not trying to get the product back, but you do need to communicate with your customer to be able to satisfy that requirement of getting that IFU out to them.
Sure. Two recalls that immediately come to mind. One is extremely current with what happened out of Arkansas with the rodent infestation at a distribution center of a major retail brand. And this had nothing to do with the manufacturer. This had to do with the distribution center, but it was a recall nonetheless of everything regulated by the FDA, pharmaceutical, cosmetics, human food, animal foods. So, it doesn't necessarily have to be that it's a problem associated with the manufacturer. It could be that there's something on the product's journey there that took place that results in the need to have a recall. The other one that comes to mind, though, is the Tylenol incident from the 80s. The idea of, again, it was not a fault of the manufacturer. It was intentional contamination, poisoning of the product. And what I have to tell you, I just recently was speaking in a few different places and this topic came up. And the number one comment that people talking about the Tylenol incident was how good of a job Tylenol did in their recall effort, how they managed that, how they responded and reacted to that need for that recall. Is what's probably on more people's minds than the actual, the actual cause itself. And it just goes, I think, to show how important it is for a company involved in a recall to get it right. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, it is. And a full disclosure that McNeil Consumer is actually a customer of ours for the complaint management software. So we've had a long history with McNeil, but just they did it correctly, right? Whenever they would put people on private jets to go out to find product off of shelves to help get that product back as quickly as possible, it really showed it builds a customer base that then thinks these people know what they're doing. They have my self-interest and my interest at heart, right? Because it can be a brand destroying situation. If you do something
very much
poorly,
so.
it can take you forever. But J&J, obviously McNeil Consumer did a very good job with that. Got the product back, made sure everybody knew about it. And that was the beginning of all these type of things, right? That went on, safety caps, all that came out of all those things with that. So,
well, and that wasn't just like safety caps and the safety tabs and the seals and stuff. That wasn't just with that company. That became industry wide.
Yeah, exactly.
I talk to students all the time that they're in their 20s or something like that, and they'll be surprised when I'll tell them, "Oh yeah, I used to be able to go to the grocery store and
I know it.
there you
Wasn't
go."
even in a box. It was just sitting on the shelf of the
Yeah,
box. Yeah, I know.
yeah.
We can trust everybody.
Well, back then though, we were talking about this. This was kind of before we talked about this era of digitization and all the big data that we're talking about. Can you kind of before we talk about how digitization of data can simplify this and help us with this, can you paint a small picture of what it was like before we had products like this in digitization?
Well, yeah. So what would have to happen would be is they would have to engage a company that was, well, let's break it up into two categories. One is a company feels like it doesn't get to the level of bringing in a company like perhaps Stericycle or, these big recalls companies that do this, right? You get them involved. It's a costly endeavor, right? You're talking, maybe somewhere in the several hundred thousands to get them in to do those type things for something large, for something that's out there, right? And if it's not to that level, they really push employees a lot of times to try to do it themselves, right? So they end up having a role where they're doing their role and then they're working through Excel, right? So they come up with an Excel spreadsheet, they send it down to their mail room, they try to do a mailing, they wait for these letters coming back, and they try to do all this in Excel and manage it. Something they've not really done before, because by the time they do it again, maybe that person's left that position. But it's and I think the main thing is they don't have, they don't necessarily have a call center to be able to take stuff back and do all that. So you have all the difficulties with it. So when we digitized this or made an application out of it, a SaaS solution for this, is that we pre-build a lot of this stuff that you'll need to be able to communicate. And we always try to go the easiest, most cost-effective, quickest way possible, right? We try to communicate through email first thing out. We also try to communicate with text if we have the cell numbers for these contacts. And so with that, we can then give them a tool where they can manage it internally. And the system through automation takes a lot of the burden off of them. They can then just, once they initiate it, which is pretty simple, they initiate it, they sit and monitor, right? And they can monitor and have multiple levels of these communications. We sent, maybe they don't respond after the third email. Maybe we have to then go to a regular first class mail that we send out a mailing that lets them identify, and the person can then respond to that mailing via their phone, right? Instead of them actually filling out a piece of paper, putting it in a pre-stamped envelope, sending it back, they could just take their phone, scan a QR code, and we would know who they are, what product they have, how many they have, and they could respond right there, follow the instruction of what they need to do, and just complete it. So now you've communicated with that person. Whereas before, it was all call center type things or paper mails that get moved around.
Well, we know there's a lot of variables in this. What were the steps from whether it's manufacturer to retail or to ultimately the end user? How many end users, how many products? We don't necessarily know how many are still on the shelves or how many are in the middle of being shipped or they're being warehoused here or there, maybe a hospital or some other step there. But clearly, the idea of making the process as simple as possible. Sure. Not that it's ever truly simple, but it can be made easier.
It can be made easier. And so as you mentioned this distributor situation where I know that I sold, 100,000 product to this distributor in Memphis, let's say. And so I sold it to them and I don't really know where they sold it after that. Right. I mean, then my responsibility goes to them. And then I'm dependent on that distributor to do the job for me at this point, right? So you're putting a burden on your distributor, and you're also relying on their capabilities to be able to do that efficiently and do it well, right? And so what we've done with that situation is we then allow them to expand that action to be able to provide their customer list and their products that got distributed onto your overall action, right? So that if they get it, they could then take it and say, we distributed to these people. They can then drag it, drop it on top of their retrieval request. It then loads into your recall. Now you at the company level can see all the additional recipients that have been placed onto this action, and you can monitor their responses. So you're not just sitting there in the dark waiting for your distributor to come back to you. So the ability to expand this and go further down, where it's a hospital or it's as you mentioned with, a franchise, for that sells, that makes tacos, right? They have 100 locations. They have lettuce they got an alert on, and now they've got to somehow start going down their their chain to be able to communicate this all the way down to the lowest level so that they can respond, pull that as quickly as possible. Similar to like a hospital, a buying group buys it at a hospital, and then it goes to a hospital distribution group, and then it goes to the individual hospitals, and then it can go to departments within inside the hospital. How do we make that easy so that they can keep expanding it down to get to the lowest level?
Well, and as we continue to find these new, let's call them disruptors, we talk about things like ghost kitchens and online distributors and some of the policies and technologies that we talk about were developed or put into place, and all of a sudden you have a change in what the actual landscape looks like and those complexities. But clearly, the way you described it, I want to pick up on this. The idea of trying to make it simpler and trying to support your partners in these efforts as much as possible. It's all not just about the idea of trying to save money, although if it's too expensive, it might seem too impossible to do, too much of a mountain. But time is such an incredible element in this. The faster we can go through these steps and try to be able to recall as much as possible in this situation. The way that I talk about it is that I know it's easy to say time is money, but time is liabilities. Time,
Sure.
the longer it takes to do this, the more likelihood there is of someone having the wrong product, someone having a whether it's damaged or mislabeled or inadequate instructions or whatever it is. And the faster we can recall as much as we can, so increasing that rapid element with recall, we're going to be able to try to reduce that number of liabilities, ideally to zero, but we want to reduce that as much as possible.
Yeah, I mean, and that's where, by having something that you can practice with too, right? So that you can set up your policies, you can work with and set up mock recalls to be able to move as fast as possible to reduce your risk. There are insurance reductions that can occur as well for the company, right? Because if you can demonstrate that you can get your product off the market quickly, companies, I believe insurance companies do work with you to be able to get a refund, to get some money back so that you can invest in this preparation to move as quickly as you can so that you can not only save your reputation, but reduce your liability on all this.
Oh yeah, because after a situation like this, you'll often see in the trade magazines or whatever, how did someone recover? Did this company recover financially? Did their reputation recover? We have to take in consideration the consumer's recovery, that idea of recovering their trust. We saw that with Tylenol back then, the idea of how, if anything, it wasn't so much recovering trust as much it was building a whole new level of trust with a company in terms of their recall actions. In fact, I don't know if people really thought about recalls that much before that incident back in the 80s. But we know that there's inherent delays. We know that there's this kind of inherent not necessarily being aware of everyone involved. So by using this technology here, by using these various platform opportunities to support our various partners, communicate with them. Now, one thing that you shared with me, I think is incredibly important. Many times people will look at this and say, well, if I'm the first to adopt this, then I'm the first to have information out there and it could be used against me. We can look at information like that, but I think we need to underscore the idea that this is information for the company to use about themselves. How, after a recall, with Triever recall management, how would a company be able to use information post-event to help improve their processes?
Sure. I mean, I think it's part of data collection in the beginning, right? Because it may not be that I necessarily have my right contact list of who I should get a hold of, right? There's a currency issue, whether this person's still in that position, it's, that you have the email for. How do we start improving that, to build that data so that we can make sure that what we send out is meeting, we know when something bounces, right? An email bounces, we provide that information to you that says, oh, this email bounced. it's not a valid email anymore. And we provide that list to you on real time on your recall, so that then you could go in and you could start modifying your data for your contacts. Well, then, that's stored with inside Triever. So as you modify this data and clean it up, it's available for you the next time. So you can do that. But part of it is probably, taking this data, looking at your actual action afterwards. How many people responded? How many attempts did it take to get a hold of them? Who were the types that didn't respond via email? Who went to first class letters? Who had to go into I always forget the name of it, from the, where you have to sign for it from the post office, or even going to UPS or FedEx, to finally deliver, the most expensive auction. But looking at your data to decide from your responses, how do I start improving that? And what policies do I change to be able to communicate with my purchasers the easiest? Whom should I get a hold of in these situations, and improve that list, which will improve your responses, I believe.
In the chat, someone just put, it just says SOPs/training. Do you see this having a role in how we revise and support SOPs, protocols, training, etc.?
Yeah, I do. And that's why, so we do have we see this a lot in searches as well, right? Mock recalls. How do I improve my processes, and how do I make sure I'm prepared for something? Because, that's going to be 80% of it, right? It's an effort to help you sleep at night, is a good way of looking at it. Because with mock recalls, you can basically set up so that the SOPs are developed around this tool, that maybe not your SOPs aren't, say, call a company A that's going to manage my recall and they do it. Well, okay, you can do that. But this way, you do have an option here that says, this is my option too. So I do have procedures set up. I have my employees, I have my folks trained. I have access to the system. My data is going to stay there all the time. I can keep it for my next action, because I may be doing something very similar to it. So that's why we think that the mock recall situation is really something that a company should take advantage of, because it really can have them ready to go. Nobody wants this to happen, but it's like having a fire extinguisher, right? I mean, you don't want a fire, but it's good to have a fire extinguisher in your house just in case, and you're ready to go. You know what you're going to do, an escape plan, those type things that you've pre-done.
Well, I talk about it in terms of the idea of the difference between the seatbelt and the airbag in our cars. It used to be you didn't have anything, but then there was a period of time where you had a seatbelt, and all of a sudden then airbags came along. Having airbags doesn't mean that we don't wear the seatbelt. And what I talk about that is, just because we have partners out there, we have other third-party technologies or people that support us in recall, we can't just assume that those will be in place and that's all we need. If we have a responsibility, we can't outsource that and say it's no longer our responsibility. It's our responsibility always to make sure that, in this case, a recall, every step we take is there. Even if we have other partners and other, again, distributors, warehouses, et cetera, in it, it's still our responsibility to make sure that we're doing this as much as possible. Therefore, the seatbelt and the airbag analogy is important for us to have. Mm-hmm. We can't just rely on something outside of us. We have to make sure that we're looking at this. And I think that the your words about the mock recall are important as well. Just because we have something doesn't mean that it works. It doesn't mean that everyone understands. And was it all right? All we have to do is this. Okay, but no one's actually tried this. Have we actually tried this to see if it achieves the goal we want it to achieve?
Right. And not to use the fire analogy that often, but, not to overdo it, but in reality, we always, although everybody's working from home nowadays, but it used to be, we'd had fire drills every so often where everybody had to leave the building, go out, go to the collection point and do everything, right? Everybody does that. So they're prepared. Everybody knows the rules. Everybody knows how to get out. That's where the mock recall is kind of similar to that, right? So it's something maybe we do twice a year. Maybe we do it at a minimum twice a year, where we can go, we can verify, we can quickly spin up an action, we can send it to everybody that we are this part of our team. They can respond, they know how to close it out, they know everything. And it gives them real hands-on tools, right, to be able to do it. I would say as well, when we talk about this preparation for it, is when you start thinking about, I'm going to transfer all this information to a third party who's going to do this recall, right? You have a knowledge transfer you're the expert at it. Now you're having to transfer all that knowledge to them so that they can act in your best interest and understand everything that you know about it, which is a big undertaking, right? And there's a risk with that. The people that are going to be doing it may or may not be, they're not going to be you. They're not going to know everything about your product and the risk and those type things. Of what really it involves. How do you respond to the customer? That's all has to be knowledge transfer that will take quite a while to do.
That's a very good point, because you can't easily transition from information to action. You have to have that transfer of knowledge. You have to have those steps in between, and even like you said, a practice, a drill, a mock recall. In the middle of doing a recall is not the time to figure out how to do a recall.
Exactly.
It's not going to help in terms of the rapid nature in it. And so, when we look at this, the idea of, well, but look, we've been operating for 10 years and we've never had to do a recall. So why should we invest in a product, a software, a service, or whatever? What do you say when people approach you with the idea of, why should we even invest in this, because this isn't an issue for us?
Yeah, it's very similar to insurance, right? I mean, instead of waiting till the worst thing happens and shelling out a lot of money, this is, with the mock recalls and setting that stuff up where you get the event, you get a tool that's available to you 24 hours a day, 365 a year, that's available, that it's relatively low cost, right? I mean, we're talking $100 a month to have, a setting access that would let you sit out there and be able to do a couple of mock recalls a year. You can, you have access to the training materials, you have all that information. So it's not a big investment, right? And plus it's a SaaS tool. So you're not sitting there saying, getting IT involved, putting it on a server, managing updates, all those type things to keeping it going. Since this is a SaaS tool, all they have to do is subscribe, and they don't have to actually do any installs locally or anything like that. So, we do have options. We try to make it, and we make connectivity as easy as possible, right? So instead of us setting up a hard code that goes into their SAP system or any kind of ERP system, really all they have to get all they have to have is a load a spreadsheet template that we provide you associated with that recall, take it, drop it on the recall, and your products or your product contact combinations, or just your products and your contact list will be loaded in. So we don't have to spend the time and money either to go in to make hard and fast connections between company databases and a SaaS tool for this.
So we can talk about reducing costs associated with a recall and reducing liabilities. We could talk about a couple other R's, I guess, as I'm thinking about it here: responsibility and reputation.
Yeah.
It's not easy to put a dollar value to reputation, but
No.
what we have seen is that it can be very costly.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's and I think a good example is a chain that sells burritos, right? They really had a hard time. I mean, they did a poor job. They did a poor job multiple times. And how do that's a very good example of, we don't really have a good way of letting people know the lettuce is bad. I need to get that to my district managers. I need to get it to my individual site managers as quickly as possible. I mean, something like that needs to be minutes, right? Half an hour. And so, that's why we offer texting in the system, right? Where you can set it up so our alerts, instead of going through email, goes to text to a district manager or to a store manager, that they can get a text every 30 minutes until they click on their phone, click on that text, and be able to respond to that recall on their phone and say, I'm pulling that lettuce. We know we got it off the shelf. It's destroyed. It's not going to be used anymore. But that cost a company almost its viability, to be honest
Yeah.
with you.
Well, if you look at it, the idea of, here's a situation where the company lost so much money, and it wasn't because of fines and fees and lawsuits. It was because consumers knew about this, and consumers decided that they could essentially vote with their dollars and go to another company.
Sure.
And at the same time, customers were using social media to share their experiences. That's actually how some of the initial outbreaks were found, was because of consumer input.
Sure. Yeah,
But
no.
I think you brought up a very good point, though, in terms of that kind of there's changes in customer or consumer, however you look at it, in terms of habits, how they communicate. It's not just the email; it's also the text. It's also the social media. It's also multiple platforms of awareness. But there's a lot of other variables that are going to make it difficult that we see today.
Exactly. I think that's a really good point. I think that's where when I talked about in the beginning about how do we make it easiest for the customer, right? Nowadays, people, if you get a phone call from a call center, there's no way you're picking it up. Right.
Yeah.
Maybe it says spam risk or whatever. Everybody's like, if I don't listen to my messages anymore, right? If you're gonna, if because that's what people do. They call now. It's just like the insurance ad that's so funny. No, you don't leave a voicemail. Everything can be answered in a text, right? And that's the way the customer is dealing now. My mother wouldn't be able to do that. She may need to call in, but we still offer that option, right? Where somebody could call in if they needed to. But we try to go to the level of where the majority of people do. I do things on my phone. I mostly do things through text. I want to be able to respond electronically. I don't want to print something. Who has a fax machine? Who has their printer that actually they can scan something back again? So how do I respond to this? And that's why we've got to give them this electronic capability. We don't want them to have to call in. We don't want to have them write it, fill out a form and send it in. It's your response rates. It's not what people do anymore. And even certified letters, I think that they're a thing of the past. I try to talk the customers out of them. I just don't. It has to be more of a down the road type thing, just because I'm not going to go to the post office to go down there, go to the window, hand them the paper so that I can get my certified letter. Chances are I'm just not going to do it.
Well, we just dealing with an election season. I'm not going to get political here, but the idea of the sheer number of emails and junk mail, from candidates, it's very easy to go skip, or delete, and depending on how you get your information, how you get your news, how you're communicating with, you could easily, overlook this critical piece of information. So
Right.
I think that it's, perhaps part of a company's efforts in terms of corporate social responsibility is to even make sure that they've taken they've done their due diligence in terms of communicating the ways they need to communicate with the people they need to communicate and with the different steps of the process of the recall.
Yeah. And you bring up the social media thing and websites and those type things. One of the things that we did add in early on was when you generate a unique action, right? You can identify on that action that I want to generate a unique URL that people can self-register for that individual recall, which then it just puts them into the recall system, and then they get automatically sent their response panel that they can respond to that individual action. So that could be placed on your company website. They could go on social media alerts that go out, those type things, where you provide people the ability to automatically register and then respond on their phone if they needed to, right? I mean, it's really simplifies the way that, again, gives them that last channel. We see it in sales, right? It's hard to sell anything to anybody anymore. People are used to searching things on the internet on their own and getting the information on their own they don't want to talk to somebody. They don't want to, they don't want to get a card in the mail where they have to get it. So that's where, I think it really kind of lends us to more of the way people live today and respond to things, and do things. There's more on a go find as opposed to being pushed necessarily. So we have to offer both of those options. Let people go find a way that they can register for that recall.
Well, I could totally see too the idea of, to sell a product here, you're selling an idea, if you will, the idea of, hey, you need to take this action. You're persuading someone that this is what you need to do and why you need to do it. And the way that we persuade people today are not necessarily the way we persuaded people 25, 30 years ago, kind of a thing. But at the same time, though, if you have, let's say you have a drug that's for elderly patients and you want to communicate with those elderly patients, sending them an email with a QR code I don't think that that's how they would necessarily
Oh,
be
I
most
agree.
likely
Yeah,
to follow up on.
exactly. Yeah, they wouldn't. And, and they, that would be an option where, when you send a first class letter to them, right? They would get that. They would have a QR code option on there if they, if they want.
Yeah.
There's a difference between my mother-in-law and my mother. My mother would not know what to do with it. My mother-in-law would, right? So it's, we have to be able to, to send it out, with the ability for, like in Triever, we can generate a unique telephone number that, would give
Oh,
them an 800 number. So you could put that on the letter that they receive. So they could call in and they can provide their information. There's a number that we assign to them. So they could talk to an agent and be able to say, oh, here's the number, or that I do. Then we know who they are. Okay, you're Betty Johnson. Okay, we can, we know who you are now. So, okay, so that's good. So you could do that. So you can kind of do that. So my mother-in-law respond with her phone. My mother would call in and put in and speak to someone and close it out that way. So, we have to have all these different options now, electronic and older, I wouldn't say older world, but, multiple options for communicating to respond to this is what your customers will need to have happen.
great. Well, before we wrap up, we have a lot of people asking, is it possible to take a look at what this looks like from your end? Are you in a position where you could show our audience anything
Oh,
here?
sure. I'm always in a position to show Triever. I like doing that. And I can do this real quick. Let's see. It'll be the 50-cent tour. It'll be the dirty, but basically if you can see my screen, I think. So it's
So
broken up.
who would be looking at this right
So this is on the top side. So this is company side, right? Where the company
Okay.
would be the one that would be going in here. So basically what they would do is they would go and they would create a new recall. They can replicate it for another recall if they've got one out there already, or an action, right? They describe it, they identify a type, the type, field action, field alert, withdrawal, recall, whatever you want to do here. You can place numbers on here that this is going to be used for other, that goes out on letters, those type things that go out on that. And then you can define what you want to let them do. Can they, do you want a dedicated 1-800 number that would then they could call into and leave a message, or get it forward to your company phone number? Whether you want to give credit, replacement, field service, these type things are options that you can do and provide them with those options for it. We do let a customer attach a photo if they wanted to. So if you wanted to send something out and say, hey, send me proof. Let's say it's a new sticker that needs to go on your medical device, or they said they have 4 of these products, right? You could say, well, once you get the sticker on, can you take a picture of it and attach that to your response? Through the phone, through a computer, whatever they want to do, they could through the phone, they just take a picture and then drop it on the Triever, and it then becomes part of that record. And they can this is that self-registration that generates a unique URL. We have certificates of completion. So with medical devices, especially in Europe, if you want them to be able to download and print a certificate of completion saying I complied with it, so they have it for their records, they can do that. It sends them, it emails them a PDF or downloads, it gives them a download available for them to do that. They can request shipping labels or return kits if they need to. We do communicate out in 18 different languages. Now,
Wow.
the main screen is just in English, but all your communications can be in local language. So if you're going to do something where you're going to be, in North America and French, French for Canadians, you could do that. So that then the recipient on their email, their links, everything is all in local languages. So they click on it, they feel comfortable with it. They can read the press release. They can see what's asked of them, all in local language and that type thing. They can do that. Here's your reminder schedule. So this is how often you want to remind somebody with an email and how many times you want to remind them, so that, if it's, you could say every 2 days, I want to send them an alert until they complete that task. And you can say, I want to do it up to 10 times. And then, we keep track of that too. So we know how many alerts we sent them. We actually know if they clicked on it, when they clicked on it, it's available to you. We know that, they looked at the email, they're partially done with the request, all that information we have. And then we also have texting for high alert type things that say, we want to send an alert every 30 minutes to and text them that. And, this response window works on both, works on a computer or a laptop. I mean, a laptop or a phone. It's, it really works well both ways. So people can respond any way they want to be able to respond on these. You can set up teams. So your team, whether I'm a review team, whether I'm a specialist team, which would be, I'm a credit specialist, I'm a replacement specialist, I'm a field service scheduler, those type things. You can set up these specialist teams. And then we also interface with the sales team. So if you do, like if you're a medical device or you need to go to, you need to have a sales rep go out there, your sales reps can pick up and monitor what's going on with their customers. And we can do it by sales region too, so that your team, your sales team could go out there and maybe take a sample, take a replacement product for them, or go in and say, hey, I can fill this out for you. And they can do it on their phone as that recipient. Now we know that they are doing it for that recipient. So, but we know that they can close it out, and, your sales team can actually, make sure that the customer is not burdened by it, type thing. We also have affected products. And so this is where you would identify your products. You actually identify what you want to send to them. You can even change these labels. So if you wanted to say that, well, I want to call this model, I could change this to model.
Oh, sure.
If I could say that, you can decide if I want to use one of these text fields. Like we have a customer that has implantable devices, right? So we want to send the model, the serial, the patient's initials, and the patient's date of birth. You can relabel all these to use that. So when the doctor receives that alert, they would be able to say, okay, it's this patient, this lot number. Yes, I have that confirmed. Okay, this is what we need to do. So that's what we give you a lot of flexibility here on what you do communicate out to them. You can also link it, if you know what model serial number or what product lots that customer purchased, we can offer a linkage on that through a template here, where on this template, they can actually go and they can say, this customer bought this model serial number, or this customer bought these 10 product lot combinations, so that when they receive their response panel, they can then only see the products that they purchased and their lot numbers that they purchased, and they'll only have to respond to those. But if you have it's more general, where I know that I sold these products to 100 different customers, you don't have to connect them, and then they would see all those products related to it. Same for the recipients. If you have a recipient list you need to upload, you can do that. You can also use, if you have a previous recall, that you have your contact list. When I talk about that, the keeping that up to date, you can then use that previous list and be able to bring that in and communicate directly with them, and they'll become part of this individual action. And then last but not least, you have your forms of communication. You have a press release that you can identify. What we call it a press release. A lot of people don't know maybe what it is. It's what they describe, what went wrong. You can attach documents. This can be instructions for use. It could be just an SOP. It could be anything, any kind of documents. It's unlimited that you can send. You can send everything but a .exe. So you can send PowerPoints, PDFs, Word docs, Excel spreadsheets, whatever it may be. You can identify questions, and you can build your own questions, and we do them at 2 levels. So you can do a question where you can put in the question itself, and you can also come in and customize your responses. So if it's not a yes/no question, like, is this device implanted? Or where is this device? And your responses could be implanted, explanted, and inventory. So you can go through and customize your question and your responses, determine your order, decide if you're going to let them respond in addition. And this would be asked once for the recall, where this one would be the same idea, but this is asked on every one of your product lot combinations or your product serial combinations, so you know about individual product. And then these are just, this is my email that I want to be able to send out. This would be my letter, this would be the letter that would go out. You can see that we do a header where they get this, the return address, those type things. They have a unique code that's tied to them, and they also have the QR code that they can scan on that header of that letter.
Great.
So that's pretty much, and then certificate of deal. But that's kind of it. You then monitor with inside here. Once it's created, we have dashboards that you can see how people have responded. And then last but not least, I want you to see what the customer sees. And let me find something that's a little better. But you can come here where they could go and you could see, this is what the customer sees on the response panel when they go. So they can see the summary of what's going on. They could download the documents. They could say, I don't have the product, or I do. They can specify a quantity, or just I have it. They can drop additional information. This is where you can attach a photo, or they could drop a document onto it, or whatever. This is where you can import multiple people if they need to to add additional people to the recall. And last but not least, if they need to message you, they can message you and you can get a conversation that goes on between the two of you. But that's kind of it in a quick nutshell.
Well, you can simplify it, but what I see here, and as we wrap up, that this is part of, it takes a Herculean effort to not only talk about the work that goes into food and product safety, but also to recalls. And while courage is an important part of that Herculean effort, so is work and strength. And I see this as being an incredibly powerful tool in that work and strength, because if we can support the work and strength of all of our different partners, of our different teams, like you were talking about, different elements within our company, so that they can have a platform that allows them to have that user interface, that ease of user support, and that completedness in terms of, did I take all these steps? Have I addressed all these issues? Can I communicate this out to all my teams? You put a tool like this in addition to others to help them with their work and their strength, partner that with the courage, you're going to be able to support that long-term effort of making sure that you do the one thing that is most important, which is obviously help your end users as much as possible.
Yeah.
We already have some of our participants saying how incredibly nice this demo is, and I hope that other people take note of this, the fact that it's not just people like in a recall center or people who focus on a recall. I think at a company, you need to have your legal counsel, you need to have your quality team, you need to have your executives, you need to have a lot more people have their eyes on this to understand that this system does not do the job for you. It really depends on the information that is collected and stored and put into the system and the actions that are taken by everyone involved in this. And I think that the demo you showed here starts to put an easy look at the idea of how it can be simplified and how it can be made something that is much more approachable. I want to go ahead and give you a last couple thoughts here before we say goodbye to our audience. What are some last thoughts you have in terms of the role of digitization and technology in recalls?
Well, I think the role is going to be related to how quickly you can respond to things and simplify the responses. I think that's been our biggest focus, is trying to make sure that people that are doing us a favor, us being the company that's involved, that is doing the recall, is making it as easy as possible for the people that have to do something. Because, when we were first starting this, we really heard a lot of hospitals complaining about a lack of structure in a particular action. You get one thing from one company, something else from another company, not communicating the press release well, because I don't know, we don't know can we use this in an emergency situation or can we not, and so what Treaver does is it does put you into a format and formula that will give that consistency over and over again, and not an opinion or somebody thinking this is what they have to do. They didn't realize they needed to do all this other stuff. And that's what I think in the end is going to be the best, is that you have consistency, ease of communication, and quick, much faster.
Yeah, such an important point and such an important topic. Greg Brigham, CEO, Treaver Recall Management, thank you for sharing this time with us today.
Thanks,
and for sharing a little bit about what you offer there. And again, thank you very much.
Thanks, guys. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.